And so an aspect that I did want to cover in this module, though, is something to do with relative sizing. And so right now we have a padding for this, our body element. And so what happens if I put in a margin, for example? If I put in like a margin of 50 pixels, hopefully that illustrates to you guys what the difference between padding and margin is. And so margin is basically the space that is outside of that element, whereas the padding is a space that is inside that element. So if I really go hard on the padding here, it's going to squish down the content, but not the borders of that body. Whereas if I put this back to 20 pixels, and if I squeeze the margin 100 pixels, it's actually squishing that border of the body. And so that's kind of the difference between where your margin, the margin and the padding, right? How we are customizing that at the moment is that we are using pixels. We're setting really set static numbers of we want a 20 pixel padding and we want a 100 pixel margin. The thing about this is that if I open the sketch either on a tablet or on a mobile phone, it might either be too large or too small, or not exactly to proportion of how I am viewing it on my device. And even if you are on a desktop, opening it on a laptop and opening it on a PC, it might kind of just sit differently in each of those instances. So what we want to try and practice is using, instead of pixels as the unit, using what is called em or em, or you can also use percentages. And so you can use percent, you can also use em, this unit measurement. It's going to be different, obviously, but what they both have in common is they're going to make your sketch responsive. So that is the visualization, and we're going to get to that later, but just looking at the text elements and everything, so that's really following the size of your browser, which is good, so that it makes sure that your web page is accessible regardless of how people are viewing it, on what device, and also even if they're like resizing their window and things like that, it will follow to the ratios of that browser window. So I might just go with like the percentage ones for now, just because it's just a little bit more straightforward. So what about this sketch, right? So this sketch is, my canvas is 500 by 500 pixels. So it's staying at 500 and 500 pixels right now. And this is what I mean with like, that's what happens when you set it as static pixels, is that if I open up, say like on an iPhone and it's showing me like this wide, my visualization is going to be like, like naturally cropped off, which we want to try and avoid by going into actually the sketch.js. And so going back to our JavaScript file, I'm going to firstly just add a new variable, and I'm going to say it's canvas div. And so remember that our sketch is living inside of a div tag in HTML. And then in function setup, I'm going to say canvas div equals document.get element by ID my sketch. And so that's really just kind of referring to that HTML element, because it's referring to this element here, because it's part of the body element, which we have set relative sizes to. But now we need to work on how to make our sketch, so our JavaScript sketch, tied with the div sizing. So this canvas div is accessing that div tag in the HTML, and then we can use it to kind of pull information and say canvas div in my create canvas, where I specify width and height, and this is still 500 by 500 pixels, so static measurements. I'm going to replace that with canvas div dot offset width. And let's just try that for now and see what happens. Great. And so now you can see that the sketch is being cut off at that width, right? So even if I narrow this down and then I refresh the page, it's going to follow the width of that div. The only thing is that if I'm resizing this window, it's not going to follow it, right? It's still being caught in the first sizing where you opened up the sketch or where you refresh the page. And so I need to refresh this, and then it's going to be resized. But the good news is that now it's resized to the div element. So it's working. It's following that parent sizing. But so we want it to also follow the div when we're resizing this, right? So it's not doing that. It's not going off the page like that. And how we do that is by a simple function, window resize function, like that. And I'm going to say once the window is resized, I'm going to use the resize canvas command, and I'm going to say canvas div dot offset width. And then for this instance, I'm going to just keep the 500 as a height. And so now, so I've just refreshed the page. It's the sketch.js is sitting nicely inside the div element. If I resize this, it's still going to stay within those parameters too. Which is great, which is what we want. And so yeah, have a play around with those. If you want to go a little extra, I would also recommend setting that 500 pixels to something that is relative to the window height. And so in my case, for example, if I can put it as window height divided by 2, maybe, then if you have like kind of higher browsers and things like that, it's still going to be in proportion. So yeah, so again, the idea is to just try and avoid any static measurements and making it as relative as possible to your browser window. Now you have it. Now you have like kind of your sketch living inside your div tag with kind of responsive sizing to make it more visualization, more flexible and more accessible. I will definitely link you guys the reference pages and the resources about that window resized function, and also about this offset width command and what that is actually doing in deeper detail, and also a little bit about kind of converting from that pixel to or pixel to percentage for our CSS too. So I will link those resources down below.